Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate 101 podcast. Excited to see you all this fine afternoon. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is our first podcast of the year, which is exciting. We've been active on the platform since 2020, and it's been so far a great run. But we're really excited to start off the year strong with a person that I've actually been following for quite some time, and as someone who does a good amount of retail locally, he's someone that I definitely look to as a expert in retail, just because, again, the amount of, activity that he has been doing, especially in his market and even surrounding areas in Cleveland. And that's Kevin Moss. I'm really excited to host you today to talk a little bit about the retail industry, retail brokerage, and then where you see kind of both going in 2026 and beyond. So it's an honor to meet you, my friend. And
yeah, appreciate having me on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, what we typically do when we first get started with the conversation is we like to learn a little bit more about the person that we're interviewing. So if you don't kind of mind sharing a little bit about your backstory, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. So Kevin Moss, I'm currently based, I'll back up. I'm a commercial real estate broker with CBRE. I've been with CBRE for 11 years, going on year 11. From Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised. Went to the Ohio State University, graduated in 2013. I worked for a shopping center owner for a year and a half, give or take. And then I've been a broker since March of 2015. Born and raised Northeast Ohio. All I know is Ohio. Haven't left Ohio. But yeah, it's I love it. I love being from the Midwest, and it's great.
Yeah.
My backstory. So I'm again from Cleveland. I'm a middle child of three boys. Grew up, had a typical, Midwest, all American background. Sports was kind of the center of our life. Played baseball and basketball in high school, and was obviously not good enough to play in college, but had a really active childhood where backyard sports year round, and or not year round, but when you could. It's a good upbringing and good Midwest upbringing. And now I'm married, I'm 34 years old with two daughters. Very, very busy lifestyle right now. And it's that's kind of a quick synopsis on my life.
Yeah, so we're the same age. I graduated in 2013 as well, and you have a daughter. I actually just had my first child in May of this last year, a daughter as well.
Cool, congrats.
Yeah,
it's very different. You don't know until you're in it. But so I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and you really don't know until you're in it that your life really it changes. Like you have to kind of adjust your work schedule and adjust everything about your life. I wouldn't change it for the world. Absolutely love it, and you really don't know until you're in it, and just the late nights, early mornings, and just nonstop. And now you've got it adds kind of meaning to what we do. So you have lives to support. You actually have to put food on the table to feed human lives. So it just really changes your perception on everything. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I absolutely love being a dad.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it gives you a renewed sense of purpose, and especially when you come home and you look at the the person in front of you, and you're like, oh wow, like you can't even put into words how much you love that person, and being able to kind of provide and be that model for them is definitely a cool experience. And I know you're doing that with your kids as well, which is really exciting. So, one thing I'm kind of curious about is, everyone kind of has their unique path into brokerage. In your case, you started working for a shopping center owner, kind of already started getting an understanding of the retail business before you dived into brokerage. I mean, was the motivation for you to join that shopping center owner was because you kind of wanted to get into the brokerage space, particularly in retail, or was it just kind of by happenstance, and then you just so happened to kind of specialize in retail? Because people ask me all the time, like, why do you specialize in what you specialize in? And frankly, for me, it was just kind of by luck. It wasn't necessarily like a chosen thing. So kind of curious what your perspective is.
So funny enough, I actually got hired by CBRE, not because, obviously because of my real estate background, but the real reason I got hired was going back 3 years prior. So we have a family business. My dad started a wholesale business when he was 19 years old, and the idea was for me to go into the family business and sort of take over the family business. With my older brother who's in the business. My younger brother's not in the business. He lives in Dallas. But the goal was for me to go into the business, and he wholesales, impulse items you see behind, convenience store counters. And my job from freshman year of college, my job was to wholesale silly bands. If you remember the animal bracelets that, the rubber band animal bracelets. So CBRE loved that. My job was that I would I would drive around, fill up my car with, inventory and knock on doors. I would, go, there were no accounts I was starting with. I would just go fresh, knock on doors, meet, convenience store owners, gas station owners, and just get my foot in the door. So they actually loved that I had that canvassing background, prior to, obviously the kicker that I, had a, real estate experience. Eventually I got an internship at DDR, but that experience knocking on doors, they just knew, like, yes, this is the skill set that you need to be a successful broker. Reason I got into retail real estate, I just love the idea of placemaking. And, people are like, oh, they should bring that concept here. They should bring that restaurant. They should bring that retailer. That is our job, to go find that retailer, that restaurant, and build communities. I look at it at the video game growing up, Sim City, where you're building cities. Like, we're literally doing that. We're creating communities. We're building places that people go to and they talk about. It's in the news and it's exciting. And the coolest part of it all is we're creating jobs. Like, people are getting employed at these places. They're meeting their significant others at these places. And we're just creating these communities from the work we do kind of behind the scenes. And I just think it's way more fascinating. It makes way more sense to me than industrial brokerage or, multifamily brokerage, where, you're just selling based on income, or office brokerage where you're just looking for, office space in an office park. Like, it doesn't, that to me, like, it's just not as exciting as, opening a new restaurant. So I just love the sense of place that we're creating, and it just sort of was attracted to that. And most people, don't realize how all these stores get open. They don't know that there's a whole industry behind it. And again, it's not just the broker. There's architects, there's general contractors, there's, attorneys that are involved in these deals. It's a huge ecosystem of how these stores get open. And I just find it fascinating that we're in the strategy behind all of it. And I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And your passion for that, and also your experience in the retail space, probably lends itself very well when you're having conversations with these retailers, because you kind of can put yourself in their shoes. I know that's one of the reasons why I got into retail myself, was because I had a small catering company in college. And then after college, I thought I wanted to get in the restaurant business. So I managed a restaurant, and then I was looking to establish a brick and mortar location, and kind of realized it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. But regardless of whether or not I ended up working out, those experiences I draw on constantly when I'm interacting with restaurant owners or different types of retailers that I'm dealing with, because I kind of can say, look, I've had that experience. I understand why this is maybe, this particular space could work based on a variety of different factors. And obviously that can benefit, you as a retailer, or if you're mom and pop, or if you're talking about nationals, obviously you're dealing a lot with the nationals as well. So, you can speak the lingo, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have that, I've never opened a brick and mortar store myself, but that experience right there, that just, retailers, when you're walking in spaces with them, you can point things out based on your personal experience. Like, that is a huge value add. I don't have a construction background, but, when I walk with people who know construction, other brokers, it helps sell the space much better when, they're like, oh, that's going to cost this. I've picked up on it over the years, but it just helps when you can add that extra value. You're not just showing them a space, you're kind of consulting and guiding them through the process. That's, just absolutely love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you kind of talked a little bit about your initial experience with your family's wholesale business, of kind of learning how to pound the pavement. So can you talk a little bit about that maybe the first few years in your brokerage career? How did you kind of establish yourself in your market so that you were able to build that clientele that you ultimately are leveraging today?
Yeah. When I first started, I always tell young brokers, say yes to absolutely everything. no matter how small it is, 1,000-foot space, urban, doesn't matter. Just say yes to everything. So I was sort of the guy that would just take on all the scraps. We didn't have a huge, my partner, Joe Corey, he was really my main partner in another, we had another broker as well, but there wasn't a huge retail team at CBRE. So we were sort of working the stuff that no one else wanted. And then on top of that, I'm the new guy. I'm taking the stuff that nobody else wanted, I guess times two. So it would get passed down, kind of filtered down to me. So I would just say yes to everything, no matter the area. I would just say yes, because you can figure it out. What I realized early on was that it's all about volume. And if your name's out there enough, eventually the small stuff is going to compound into some bigger things. And then eventually those slightly bigger things will compound into even bigger assignments. And what I also realized was that you can flip inbound calls on your landlord listings into tenant rep assignments. So I would take my, the sign calls, they're unrepresented. I would then try to help them find locations. And then, again, you're in the ecosystem, you're talking to landlords, you're talking to brokers, you're, even if there is no deal, you're still data collecting and figuring out who owns what the market rents are, what the space conditions are. Even if it's not a fit for your client, you're still just building that database, because unlike residential real estate, there's not like an MLS where you have every listing just posted. I mean, yes, we have CoStar and Crexi, but a lot of the information's not posted publicly. So you have to figure it out. The only way to do that is to talk to owners, talk to brokers, and just really get out in the field. So the first few years were very, very slow, like just taking on small deals, but it was able to scrap by enough that we were able to compound into some bigger assets. And then we finally got a big break a couple of years in, where we had a large power center that kind of got us to the next level. But yeah, the first couple of years, it all neighborhood strip centers, some grungier Class C shopping centers. But yeah, the first few years were pretty rough.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny you say that. I mean, I think there's a shared experience amongst many brokers regarding
it's a rite of passage. Everyone does it. Like, it's a rite of passage.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it kind of reinforces the idea that, you can't tie income to, obviously activity is the most important thing, right? So to your point, making the reps, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000-foot assignment. It doesn't matter if it's on the landlord side, you have a space that's kind of a very difficult space, an elbow space that is run down and there's limited, opportunity as far as TI, et cetera. Those can be somewhat challenging to lease at times. But, to your point, if you get a sign out front, you start getting tenants that are inquiring about spaces, then you convert those into opportunities to be able to represent them on the leasing of other spaces. It's a flywheel effect. And so, all you're looking for is just that opportunity. And that's one of the reasons I love brokerage so much. It is truly an entrepreneurial endeavor. So you have to find ways to get scrappy, ways to get creative. And hopefully as you start to establish yourself in your career, then those more, sexy quote unquote opportunities may present themselves, and you'll be well equipped to be able to handle those because you've already done so many other transactions that now your repository of the data that you have in your toolkit can really lend significant value to future transactions that you take on.
Yeah, so. And I tell younger brokers all the time, it's all about getting your swings in. It's all about the reps. Like, you're not, and think about like baseball terms, you're not going to just step up to the plate and hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball. Like, it's really hard to do that. But like, you have to get the swings in. You have to see the ball. You have to get an understanding of how the system and the processes works. Like, you're not going to just get a blue chip tenant off the bat. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, you have to practice, understand how to present sites, how to literally just save the information into files and present it in, spreadsheets and, mapping and all that. Like, you need to know, you have to, start somewhere, and better to start off in a smaller assignment than to get a big assignment handed to you and completely botch it, which is which actually happened to me. And ironically, it's a good client of mine now, but I somehow landed a really good tenant, and I just had no idea what I was doing. and it just did not go well. But we stayed in touch over the years, and now I'm doing multiple deals with this group. They realize and recognize that, yes, I was young and hungry at the time, but there's also a certain point of, you got to know your market. You can't just jump in and just, just because you're aggressive and everything, you just can't just, if you don't have experience, you need to build those reps to be able to, take that hunger and that, that energy, but you need to have also like the technical skills and how to actually perform. Because, aggressiveness only gets you so far. You got to know the market, and you got to know the processes.
Absolutely. And knowing the market is about being in it day to day. And, it's amazing the amount of information you can gather just by having conversations with owners and brokers and such. I mean, I regularly do deals with tenants where it's not listed. It's just, you call up the landlord rep or you call up the owner, and it's like, oh, we may have a vacancy coming available at this particular space. If you'd like, would like to walk through the space and kind of give a feel for whether or not it's a good fit, then we can do that. And you can execute a deal off the books, or not off the books, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it happens regularly, especially with these coveted areas of town where everyone's looking for space in those areas. So I think a lot of times being able to have some of that insider information is invaluable for your clients. And if you become kind of the go-to person for that, you start generating.
Just happened to us. We're talking to a restaurant tenant. Do you have any space coming available? Hey, I actually do have space coming available. No one knows about it, but we just got noticed 2 days ago that we're losing a tenant, and it made a deal before we even hit the market. So
that's amazing.
Again, that's just being in the market and just talking to people and having the conversations.
So one question I have is, obviously with you being in the retail space and being so active in it, you would understand that I get questions all the time about retail. Is like, oh, is retail kind of going the way of the dinosaur? Or is retail dead? And obviously I have my own opinions on it, and I'm kind of curious as to what your thoughts are on the retail environment in your local market, and I guess what type of activity are you seeing at the different strata of retail, and maybe even if you can define retail real estate, because what's happened over the last 20 plus years is that it's not just brick and mortar. I mean, it is brick and mortar, but there's not just general retail or restaurant. Now you're starting to see like medical services. You're starting to see all these different other service providers that are coming into a retail environment. So I'm kind of curious if you could share some insights in that.
So I've been in the real estate industry since, I guess, call it 2012.
Yeah.
Retail real estate's been dying, air quotes, dying since 2012. There's the retail apocalypse ever since I got into the industry. Obviously, I wasn't involved. We were in college and high school when everything really, really hit the fan. But they've been saying this forever. And yes, there was a little blip, COVID. Nobody wanted to talk about opening new stores in 2020 when they couldn't even physically get the keys to open their own stores. Like, they legally weren't allowed to open, at least in my market. So retail is always evolving. There's always going to be a sense of place. My thesis has always been, you're not going to sit at home and just order, stuff online all day. You're not going to just, people do, but for the most part, the majority of people aren't sitting at home ordering Uber Eats. They're going to restaurants. They're going to have an experience. They're going to the gym. We saw what happened with Peloton. People are going back to the gym. They're going out to do stuff. They want to have a sense of place. They want that second and third place. A lot of work from home people, they want to just get out of the house and do stuff. And when they go do things, like, they're touching and walking into a shopping center. They're going to restaurants. They're going to the gym. They're going to the, again, like you said, medical, like urgent cares and, wellness facilities. They're help, so sauna and cold plunge places. They're in retail centers. So there's always going to be a sense of place for retail. And whoever, you watch the news and you think the world's like, falling apart. All these stores, all these bankruptcies are happening. Yes, there are bankruptcies, but usually for the most part they get leased. I will say though that C and D shopping centers, yes, they're going to have some vacancy for quite some time, but the reality is it's cyclical. So like those C and D centers, they're gonna be something else. It may not be retail, maybe an auto part, auto something, or storage or something non-retail. But there's always going to be a need for brick and mortar real estate, and A listings, A properties, even B plus properties. Like, there's not a lot of vacancy. It's really hard to find any quality space, and not just a micro. micro level in Cleveland, but nationally, you just can't find good space, especially because they're not building very much. It's hard to build. It's too expensive. The rents aren't there. So we're in a pretty healthy spot in terms of, vacancies, not a ton of vacancies, which is not great when your commission is relying on leasing up space. You need the vacancies to lease the space. So, the Rite Aid bankruptcy kind of helped me get through the past couple of years. Had a really good run, backfilling those. But for the most part, we need more bankruptcies to, we need more bankruptcies to get some of these spaces back because, people are looking to expand, but there's nowhere to expand to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you say that. Yeah. It's funny. You're just praying like, hey, when's the next big bankruptcy coming up? It's like Tuesday morning, I think it was Tuesday morning.
It was Big Lots a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago. Big Lots was another one that filed bankruptcy. One thing I'm curious about is how are you seeing these big box spaces that are kind of going dark? I mean, are they still somewhat, I guess obviously it's dependent on location, but I'm kind of curious as to, what your thoughts are on those spaces and if they're, you're seeing more kind of retro fitting up the space to be kind of smaller to accommodate different types of tenants, or most landlords kind of wanting to get some of those big box tenants back. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So we're seeing a bit of both. Some of the markets, the rents just don't justify splitting it and spending the TI dollars and the landlord work to split into multi-tenant. But we are seeing that. I mean, there are tenants that are expanding in the 10 to 15,000 foot range that we're seeing, with 80,000 foot box or 60,000 foot box get split into multi-tenant. But there are anchor stores or junior anchor boxes that are backfilling these spaces. They've just been chomping at the bit, waiting for some of these, Big Lots and, Joann Fabrics to come back. But yeah, we're seeing a bit of both. And there are traditional soft good. A lot of fitness, a lot of entertainment. Pickleball was huge. We've kind of seen the slowdown, seen a bit of a slowdown in that. But there's hardware stores are extremely active right now. And actually we had a couple, so not as from a big box standpoint, but we've had some Rite Aids get converted into car washes. So we're seeing alternative uses for these boxes, and good real estate, regardless of the market, it's always going to be absorbed.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, even if it's repurposed into something else, if the location's great, demographics are good, access, transit, how many cars per day, there's all these metrics that a lot of these retailers look at to kind of determine whether or not a site's going to fit what they need. And if it kind of checks all the boxes, it's kind of amazing to see, because it's some I've worked with different, national tenants where it's just like, okay, well, this is kind of our set criteria, and here, if you can find a space that kind of meets that criteria, even if the space itself and interior needs full gut rehab, they'd much rather go there, obviously, than maybe a ready to go space that doesn't check those boxes. And so,
yeah, and we're seeing a little bit more flexibility in some tenants. Just maybe they're not going, they want to get near the market. Like, maybe they'll go into the B center to just to get into the market, or they're taking a space that's got some weird configuration. They're figuring out ways to get in. But yeah, we're seeing tenants be a little bit more flexible now than the past, earlier, I guess, in my career, when they were like, it's got to be this way. There's no other option, or else it's not going to happen. Yeah,
no, that makes complete sense. So, on the development side, which you kind of alluded to, we're not well, from a national perspective, gone are the days that you see a power center being developed, here and there all over the place. It's very strategic. And honestly, with the way the construction costs are going, it's sometimes untenable to be able to do that. And so in our local market, we really haven't had a new shopping center developed in quite some time. So we have like a stagnant existing inventory of these larger centers, but you do see a decent amount of development when it comes to, you do see a decent amount of development when it comes to these outlots being developed, or you start seeing some more freestanding, standalone properties or projects. And I'm kind of curious as to, you do a lot, it seems like, in that space as well, where you're dealing with land that you're presenting to different perspective, developers. And I'm kind of curious as to what your experience has been with having conversations with these developers, and what are you seeing as kind of the more prevalent developments that are taking place?
So we are seeing very little new development from a strip center, power center standpoint. There was, I believe, one that was delivered in our market with TJ Maxx, Five Below, and Grocery Outlet. That's probably the largest shopping center that's been ground up developed in our market in the last 12 to 18 months. So the development we're seeing is more single tenant pads where it's an owner user, or maybe it's a multi-tenant, like with four or five tenants in a strip center. But we are seeing no, outside of the one example, we're seeing no shopping center development at all. Some of these land sites, they will sit for some time. We are seeing, a lot of multifamily developers. They're still pushing. That's more where the land listings I have, I would say it's multifamily, self-storage, or just single tenant pad users. But we're not seeing very much new construction of shopping centers whatsoever.
Definitely. No, I could see that. And I guess regarding some of those, is it predominantly independent developers that are buying these properties and then kind of sourcing the prospective tenants, or you're helping them source the prospective tenants, or are you seeing, these retailers, for lack of a better word, buying these lots and kind of having their own preferred developer that it handles the actual construction project, or is it kind of a mix of both?
For the most part, it's a developer, but you will see single tenant, auto parts stores. They'll buy their own property and build up, self-develop.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see like a Dollar General, like they usually have a developer that will come in, buy the land, entitle it, and then build for them, and then merchant build and flip it. But for the most part, it's it's a developer that will come in with a tenant in tow. Other than like a bank or fast food, like for the most part, like if you see a 3 or 4 tenant strip center, it's going to be a developer that's going to come in and build that. They know who the tenants are that's interested in the property. So yeah, I would just say for the majority of the time, it's a developer that has tenants in their pocket.
Sure. Yeah. No, and at least in my recent experience, and I've done a couple of acquisitions on the kind of pad site. That's kind of been my experience thus far as well. So that's kind of interesting. So, regarding Cleveland as a whole, I mean, how have you seen the retail market evolve in your area? Because you've been in the business now for
called a decade plus.
Over a decade. So obviously there's been a lot of changes, I'm assuming, in your market. And Cleveland is a pretty large metro area. So, I'm sure there's a lot of nuances that a lot of people outside your market probably don't know about. So if you could share a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Cleveland, in the early 1900s, over 100 years ago, we were the 4th largest city in the United States.
Yeah.
We had huge population decline in like the 60s, is when all the factories sort of shut down and people moved out. So Cleveland is sort of a donut where the suburbs are great, tons of income in the suburbs, but in the city limits, there's a huge void it's starting to come back now, but there's a huge void of infrastructure, dilapidated buildings that, for, 50 years ago were full, and now they're just empty, industrial warehouse buildings and, population decline and blight. But there's been a huge turnaround over the past 10 to 15 years of just get lost. There I am. Ton of warehouses that were converted to what is going on? Into loft style apartments. You could see me, right?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you just went away for a split second, but you could start again. You were talking about the blighted buildings, kind of closer to downtown, and some of the projects that have taken place since then.
Yeah. So Cleveland is like the market leader nationwide in converting loft style built like warehouses into a town, into luxury apartments. So downtown, the city center in particular, regarding the residential, we're like nearly fully occupied from a residential standpoint, and with that, the retail starting to come. There's been a handful of new retail. Cosm just announced that they're coming, and they're going to, it's the 5th location. They chose Cleveland. Obviously the Cavs are here, and this huge investment from Bedrock, but there's a lot of focus in the city limits of Cleveland. But really, we're a suburban city. So the suburbs are really good. We have, low cost of living, just not I guess it's a pro and con, not a ton of traffic, which is great. If you're coming from like Chicago or wherever, you're fighting with traffic, all the time. But in Cleveland, it's just rush hour traffic. It's not bad. And we're really suburban centric. So our suburbs are built out nicely. Traditional power centers, your typical Targets and your Myers, your Walmart, your TJ Maxx and Home Goods, all those tenants. But for the most part, the Cleveland retail market is very healthy right now. There's very little retail vacancy out there, whether it's big box, end cap, out parcels, very little vacancy, which is a good sign. And just overall, Cleveland's and it's not just Cleveland, it's Akron, Canton, and we include Sandusky and then Youngstown to the southeast. Mansfield is a sort of tweener. It's an hour south of Cleveland and an hour north of Columbus, but we cover that territory as well. But overall, we're seeing a ton of just not double digit growth, but we're seeing growth for the first time in some of these suburbs, and we're in a really healthy position to continue that expansion. But since I've been in the industry, you go to some other markets like Columbus, very micro, but in Columbus, there's new suburbs that are being built. We don't really have that in Cleveland. We're established. We kind of have our suburbs, but there are some communities that have seen big box growth with, new Cabela's and, Duluth Trading Company, Menards, and Topgolf just opened a second Cleveland location. So there's been some good net new growth. This suburb's called Avon, and it's greenfield, and it's expanding pretty aggressively and pretty rapidly. But for the most part, Cleveland is a low cost of living, great place to live, friendly people, good food, good culture, good sports teams. We have the most seats outside of out of Broadway in the Playhouse District, most theater seats. So we get big shows that come through Cleveland all the time. We have a really good theater district, and we're based on it. We were Steel City. Now, it's Eds and Meds. So we've got, University, Cleveland Clinic is the number one employer. University Hospital is up there as well. But we have good schools, Case Western Reserve and John Carroll University, and, not far from Kent State, University of Akron, Cleveland State. So we have a good, educational base, and yeah, it's a good place to live and a good place to raise a family.
That's amazing. Yeah, and a total population in the metro, because it's over 2 million, isn't it?
Over 2 million. If you include the CSA, which is like Youngstown and Sandusky, we're like 3+ million. So we kind of skew it sometimes when we try to tell people that Cleveland's a little too small. So we try to, it's between 2 and 3 million.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, it's how Louisville is, right? Here, it's kind of interesting too, because we're the Ohio River cuts through Kentucky and Indiana. So there's the Louisville side, which is the Kentucky side, and then right across the river there's Jeffersonville and New Albany, which are part of the Louisville MSA. But if you were just to look at Jefferson County, you're like at maybe 800,000. But if you encompass frankly, it's only a 20-mile radius maybe, so you can get to any place in less than 30 minutes. Then you're talking like 1.3 or 1.4. So
yeah, and that kind of goes again. Like sometimes when we try to say, hey, well, you can maybe do like 10 locations, that the lack of traffic sometimes goes against it, where it's like, well, we're 10 miles, but it's really 15 minutes because it's all freeway and there's no traffic. Sure. Yeah. Whereas in, Los Angeles, you can be a mile and that's 30 minutes. And it just, it kind of goes against it sometimes, where it's like, well, maybe you can't do as many as you think just because, the drive time isn't really that bad. People drive farther here. We're just used to it. But, plays in our favor, it doesn't play in our favor sometimes, but can't win them all.
Well, and that's part of the selling, right?
Yeah.
You have to sell the story, right? You have to craft the narrative regarding whatever area you're kind of if you're representing a landlord, crafting the narrative as to why you, Mr. Retailer, or you, Mr. Developer, or Mrs. Developer, should come in and occupy the space. And having that market knowledge that you've developed over the last 10 or 15 years is obviously.
Yeah, and I do that all the time when someone they're sitting in a office wherever, in the western side of the United States, and you're they're like, well, it's too close. It's like, well, no, I know the market. You got to prove the drive times. The drive time in this area, I'm telling you, the traffic, you think it's too close, but it's not. There's barriers. There's other reasons why that it's not too close, and you only get a real estate director's attention for maybe 10 seconds. So you got to sell that story within 10 seconds in email. That if you get a lengthy email, they're probably not going to read through it all. But if you get a nice quick bullet point why it's not too close, you get their attention.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you have that market knowledge because this submarket may be kind of attached to this submarket in some capacity, but it could be there's something about that particular submarket that makes it unique, and that people from this area aren't going to be going into that area as often. So you capture a brand new segment that maybe you didn't know. But if you were just looking at the distance between the two spaces, you may say, well, it's not really, doesn't fit the narrow box that we've created. And I think you've described that a lot of retailers are starting to kind of be a little bit more flexible as to what they're willing to do just to kind of make sure they can capture, market share in different markets. And, that's part of the color you provide,
Exactly. That's our value add for sure.
Absolutely. So retail, as you said, has been evolving for a long period of time. Where do you think retail is going? And I know that's a very general statement because we've already kind of described that retail is not just, the general retail store. It encompasses the general retail store. It encompasses lifestyle experiences like the gyms, like the pickleball courts. It encompasses restaurants. It encompasses medical services. So there's a varying base of potential occupants of retail space. But I'm kind of curious as to where you think, some of the maybe 2 or 3 bullet points of kind of general trends that you see progressing as you continue, as the market continues to evolve.
Yeah. So this is more of a macro. I think zoning needs to be a little bit more flexible to allow alternative uses into retail shopping centers. So I think multifamily needs to play a component into some of these shopping centers where if you have an anchor store that just can't be redeveloped, but maybe it's better off for multifamily or senior living or something. There needs to be, the REAs that you typically restrict multifamily. So that's a whole nother conversation. But B, the zoning, a lot of these cities don't want new apartments. They don't want new residential. And, even though adding more residential will help, with the current, real residential situation where it's too expensive and young people are getting priced out and all that. But I think there needs to be some sort of a living component in some of the, obviously not in every scenario, but there are scenarios where it's obviously should be residential. So I think more alternative uses it's kind of the way. And, it's hard to predict the future. You don't know what use is going to be around in 5 years. Who saw cold plunge in vitamin C showers as a concept, sweat house, like who saw that coming? So there's always new concepts. Pickleball was, over the past 5 years has been growing pretty quickly, and who saw that coming, 5-10 years ago. So it's really hard it's a tough question to answer just because you don't know. The world's evolving so fast. And what I will say is that, just back to what I mentioned earlier, like, people yearn for the experience, they yearn to get out of the house and want to do things and, see people and feel like they're adding value to society and kind of being out about. Restaurants are going to be around. They're not going anywhere. So there's always going to be some sort of community aspect to retail.
Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate your insights regarding the zoning laws, because I think that's not a unique issue in, your market. It's definitely not a unique issue in our market. It's definitely a national issue. And, I can understand the logic behind wanting to make sure that things are in their proper place around the city. Because again, you don't want just people like, you hear these stories about Houston that doesn't have any zoning laws, and you could have like a industrial building next to like an apartment complex or something like that. It's kind of a trope, or people always talk about it as kind of a funny thing. But, I can understand not maybe going to that extreme, but being able to simplify the process when it comes to getting the proper entitlements to get things done, and then having the cities and counties and other surrounding areas advocate for new development that's going to be a net positive for the city. Because I think the challenge that we face in our market oftentimes too is that people will come to Jefferson County and they'll say, okay, like, I want to do this project, but then they figure out, okay, well, this is the process I have to take to entitle a project, and it's going to take me 1.5 years or however long it's going to take you to get before you can actually get a shovel in the ground. It's like, well, I can just go across the river to Indiana, and Indiana is going to be a little bit easier to deal with. So it's
and that's an issue in our market too. And there's a major disconnect. So I do the tenant rep work for Circle K in our market. Yeah. And that's always the issue where, zoning, trying to figure out the timeline it'll take to get through the zoning process. And the bigger issue is really getting the owners on board to let them know, we would love to close sooner, but the reality is this is how long it takes. Like, we're not making this up. It takes this amount of time. It's going to take, these steps. And if you ever want to get your property sold to a good buyer, if this is what it has to go through in order to get to that step to be able to close. So we're seeing a real disconnect between property owners, cities, and then how long it takes to kind of put the whole deal together. And it's just it's slowing things down pretty significantly. And it's it is a little frustrating that sometimes you want a deal to get done quicker, but there's just things that are literally out of your control. The township or city only meets once a month, or they don't have a full staff that day, and they have to reschedule to the next month. You got to wait 60 days until you can get back on the docket. Then you're on the docket. They say you got to come back in 30 days. You got to make these changes. Then you got to resubmit. It takes deals deals are just taking much longer, and it's creating friction, putting these deals together, because you got owners who are impatient and they're like, I just want my money and just let's just close this deal. It's like, you can't. They don't have approvals. So it's not just that example, but it's just everything's just taking longer and longer and longer, and it's just slowing things down on a macro.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you can do what you can as far as educating people about the process, but and interestingly enough, with a lot of these owners that you're describing, some are sophisticated. They own a bunch of land and everything, so they have an understanding of how this process works. But for someone who's owned a piece of land, maybe it's been in their family for quite some time, they're maybe not in the real estate business. It just so happens the path of progress have caught up to where they're at. They're not necessarily as knowledgeable about how everything kind of works on the back end. And so oftentimes you're having to kind of handhold and educate to explain, like, hey, this is how it works. And I know it's a little frustrating that it's not on the timeline that you expected, but the expectations you currently have are not in line with what's the reality. Yeah. So we have to kind of, work together to get to the ultimate goal of you getting the price you want, because frankly, retailers tend to pay the highest price per acre because there's a reason for it, right? It's tied to sales. And if it's in the proper area, typically your retail developer is going to pay higher than a track builder or a industrial builder, et cetera. So.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And that just trying to educate them without insulting them. And that's there's a song and dance. You gotta meet them, shake hands, and hey, this is what the process is. We understand, and just gotta make it seem like you're on their side. But we're getting deals done, but it just, a lot of these owners just like, oh man, it's a battle to get them to agree to anything. But hopefully they're not listening.
Yeah, I know. No, well, I mean, and maybe they are. Maybe they can get a better perspective on what the reality is, and some will take the advice, some will not, and that's it. That's just part of the business, right? That's what we get paid, to do, is to help move these things to the next level. So, that's pretty awesome. So another thing I'm kind of curious about is, I don't know if you're kind of diving into new technologies, or are you seeing retailers kind of leverage some of these newer AI platforms or other technologies to better provide a better experience for their customers? And then also regarding the site selection process and development, are you seeing new technologies, or are you using different technologies as well to help?
So commercial real estate is archaic.
Yeah.
We are usually 10 to 15 years behind technology. Just in my decade of experience. So like my experience with AI, it's helpful, very helpful in terms of abstracting information from leases and just collecting just data and just scraping data. Very helpful. Personally, I'm not as big a fan of AI, especially on I have a software where I am doing outreach, and it has helped me get deals and find find potential buyers and tenants for properties. So it has been helpful, but you got to be a little careful, because you sometimes, if you're putting the AI in your voice, you got to just make sure you're sounding human and not a robot. Where real estate, commercial real estate especially, it's a person to person to people business. Like,
absolutely.
Losing that people connection. We already sort of got in the digital age during COVID, where everything's Zoom and Teams, and we're all doing stuff online. I think adding that robotic AI element to the personal side is the wrong way to go. It's good for some things, but you can't lose that sense of touch, that the human element. Regarding the data, in terms of using data to sort of justify deals, Again, you got to be careful with the information you provide. There are some softwares that you use that, if you're relying on it as gospel, you just got to double check your source to make sure that if you're claiming it's the top performing restaurant and it's the opposite, it's the worst performing restaurant because, a small sample set extracted into, showing it as a higher performer, then you got to be very careful and definitely cite your source and try to double check your sources. Because we've been caught in that a couple of times where trying to sell the sizzle on something and they're like, actually, we know that operator, they don't do well. It's actually one of the worst performing stores. And you just got to double check your sources.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that that's a very insightful take, in that you can't take these tools as necessarily gospel. I'm sure you've dealt with it, and I know I have, where I plugged something in and there was an output given to me by AI that I kind of was curious about. I was like, this doesn't seem right. And then you go deeper into it and you prompt it to say, well, can you fact check that and make sure it's correct? And then they go back and they say, oh yeah, you caught the mistake. And it's like, okay, that if I had shared that information with someone, I would have looked like an idiot, something like that.
Yeah. My biggest issue with AI is that Google search is just so much harder to find things now. It's like you just type in your name, like, there's like very few results that are, say you want to or look up a phone number or something, like it's much harder to find information now. And you got to go through all the AI stuff instead of just traditional Google search. And at the end of the day, the Google search was just way easier. You just type in what you're looking for and it pops up. Now you got to put all these prompts in and have conversations. And if you're just looking for a quick answer, you got to sit down, like it's not happening. You got to sit down and kind of scrub through all the information. And I don't know, I'm kind of like an old man yelling at clouds. Like I just want my information. Porch, right? I don't want to have to dig through all this stuff and have a conversation with a robot. No. So I just, finding phone numbers, finding contact information, like I'm very good at it, but it's getting much harder to find that information than it was just 2-3 years ago before the AI implementation.
Sure. Yeah, no, I don't disagree. There's definitely some pros and cons. One thing I've used AI for, which is kind of helpful, is report building. So we'll do scraping public data. One thing I just created on Lindy, which is an AI tool. It goes on your web browser and then, scrapes public data for rezones. So once a week, I'll get a report of, for the planning commission here locally, what's on the docket. And then there'll also be a report that you can scrape based on what the determination was for those results. And so it's kind of helpful. Has it led me to have any specific deals? But no, but I think it's helped me kind of get perspective on, path of progress, types of projects that may be coming down the pipeline. And so, for that, I appreciate that.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and then usually, if it hits planning commission, it's obviously too late, but it's also before it gets to the news. So, but you can take that information and share it with owners and clients, and then hopefully, win more business. But that's interesting.
The data collection piece and the data aggregation type of use case, I think, could be helpful. But to your point, we're just heavily relying on these tools unilaterally and not questioning some of the data outputs. Because again, AI is not perfect; it's fallible. So, you got to be very careful. Once you plug it in, you don't just take it as gospel. You kind of have to fact check and go deeper than just the surface level to make sure that you're actually providing something that is accurate. So.
Yeah, and it is so obvious when someone's emailing you in AI, just off the rip. I'm just like, I have no respect for you if you're going to send me that email in AI. Just type the email out. Just send the message. Like, why are you typing? You couldn't respond. You couldn't type the 3 sentences yourself. So I just lose respect for people who only communicate in AI. I'm like, are you that lazy that you can't do it?
Yeah. Dude, those dashes, it's funny because I
do the dashes. I'm like, I swear I'm a human.
I swear I'm using them right. And it's like, yeah, but nowadays, if you see those dashes, it's like, oh, it's AI.
Yeah.
But it's
bolding random words. I'm like, okay, that's AI.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's interesting to hear your take on that. So what are your long-term goals with your business? Because obviously you described a career that has progressed to a point now where you're doing a lot of really cool deals. You're engaged in the community. You recently won an award, so congratulations on that. I believe it's 40 under 40 for Cleveland, which is awesome and well deserved. So what's your long-term vision for your career and yeah, just kind of interested to hear your take.
One of my, I guess one of my weaknesses is that I'm really bad at goal setting and vision setting. I'm more just in the present and just continuing to grow our business. And we built an awesome team. I've got really great partners and great support, and great family at home with my wife and kids. That I don't really have these huge grandiose ideas that I need to be at this, I need to do this, like by this time, like, because usually, like, you set crazy goals. Like, I don't know, like from my experience in the past, you set these crazy goals that you don't hit them, you get close to them, but you don't feel as accomplished if you missed your goal. So I try to avoid creating these big grand ideas. But right now we're just focused on growing our business, and we've got a huge runway, tons of great clients, really cool projects that we're working on, and just continuing to build our community. And just again, future is bright. We got a great team and great momentum heading into the future.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I know. And to your point, I think goal setting is one thing, but I think in this business, it's a blocking and tackling business. So if you do the right things on a day-to-day basis, you're going to be in a better position than you were today versus tomorrow, right? So, I think your idea of living in the present and being deliberate about the activities that you take every day and to make sure you best serve your clients is a good way to approach it. And even if, to your point, you don't have like I will achieve this goal by this date by doing this, like it's irrelevant.
Right.
As long as
as long as you always have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
My North Star is my family. I want to just continue to, see our income continue to increase so I can afford and continue to, provide a great lifestyle for my family. So that to me, that's my goal. But I need to be, this title, I need to, have this amount of deals done or this income or have whatever. I don't think like that, but my goal is to continue to grow and continue to grow our team and just to continue to take market share.
That's amazing, man. Well, I know you will, and I'm really excited to follow along with that journey. So, what I like to do near the end of the podcast is open it up to Q&A. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever platform that this is being distributed on, please feel free to type away in the chat box, and we'll give it a minute or so to allow for that to happen. In the meantime, I was going to ask you, is there a question or maybe an insight that you wanted to share with the audience that maybe I didn't get around to either asking you as a question or you wanted to kind of hit home?
Not really. I guess the big thing that I get asked from, younger brokers and people who are maybe a few years into the industry, it's like, how do you get to the next level and how do you continue to grow? And I always just tell young brokers, like, this is not a job. This is a career. You're building, especially what I do, like, in terms of leasing, investment sales is maybe a little different, but in terms of leasing, like, this is your life. Like, everything you do, every time you're out and about, like, you have to be thinking about, oh, there's that restaurant there. Oh, that restaurant closed. You always have to be thinking of the communities and understanding your market. So, it's not, hey, not 5 o'clock, I'm going to close my laptop, or hey, 9 o'clock, I'm going to open my laptop and start the day. It's not, we are not that career. We are always on. We're always thinking about work. Obviously you have to have like a release and, maybe not think about work all the time, but like for the most part, like, just always be thinking about, your communities, especially in retail. And then, early and, it evolved because now I have kids and I have responsibilities and I like to, I take my kids to school and, pack their lunch and everything. So the work schedule, work structure, when you don't realize that when you're young, but it really changes everything. You don't have, 5, 6 o'clock at night. You don't have that time to yourself anymore. Now you've got kids at home and you've got to, you want to have a good life. You got to be able to be present. You got to be a present parent. And then when they go to bed, then you got to, be a good husband. And it's really difficult. You don't think about that early on in your career. So you got to find the time early in the morning. And just for me, again, I wake up before 4 a.m. and I'm working and firing off emails before 4. And you just got to find the time, because when you're young and you don't have responsibility, if you're single, low expenses, you've got that time to yourself. And looking back, I wish I did more of that, but now there's no going back. I've got, my sales pitch when I was young was, hey, I have no responsibility. I've got no mortgage. I got, just my rent, my car payment, and that's it. Now it's like, hey, I've got all that now I have to close these deals. So that was always my sales pitch. Now I'm the person that I was always pitching against, that I have no responsibility. Like now I have all the responsibility, a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I appreciate the feedback there. We actually, the previous guest we had on, one of our, major talking points during the podcast was balancing, the responsibility of fatherhood and being, just successful broker. And that's something that we don't nearly talk about as much as we probably should, because it's one thing to just be, the top performer in your market and, have all the accolades. But if you're letting the other balls drop, I mean, that's not, at least, my opinion, and I'm sure you kind of feel the same way, is that that's not necessarily a fulfilling experience.
You're not winning. If your home life is losing, you're losing, period.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not winning here, you might be doing all the deals, but you come home, you're divorced or whatever happened. Like, not to, no disrespect to people who have gone through that,
Sure.
but like, if you let your home life slip, like that's priority number one for the most part. Like, just don't let that slip. And that's been kind of why I wake up so early and why I'm like, when I have the time, I'm, thinking about work. But then when my kids are home, it's like, okay, it's home, kid time right now. So I can't do this.
Yeah. And it's a balance, man. I'm still working on that as well, just because we had our first child in May, and, I frankly admit, like early on, it was really hard because you're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. It's dark days,
It's dark days. And then you're not sleeping and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to like do stuff today. And, the baby is waking up every 2 hours, and it's a process, man. So I definitely commend people. Now that I have the experience, I can attest to the fact that it is
once they start sleeping, it's much better. But those days when it's a continuous nap for 6 months, you're only sleeping 2-3 hours at a time. If you get a 4-hour break, it's like I just slept for like 14 hours. It feels amazing.
That's funny. Yeah. And you mentioned another thing I'd share before we, see if anyone else has any questions is, regarding being on all the time. It's funny. We'll be driving down the street somewhere and I'll just be looking over and my wife's in the car and I'll be like, oh, that building, just sold, or, hey, that's actually getting leased by someone else. And she's sick of it. She's like, okay, whatever. Like, I
get off the freeway sometimes, but hold on, we're going to take a detour here. I want to go see what's going on over here. And,
dude, I do all the time. And it's funny. It's funny because my wife's like, oh my gosh, okay, whatever. Like, but it's part of it, man. It's part of the business. So, well, hey, man, it looks like you answered all the questions we have so far. I mean, dude, I really appreciate your time. I really think I gained a lot of insight from our conversation today, and I'm really excited to hear what feedback we received from those who are listening, either in a podcast format or any other social platform that we're distributing this on. So really appreciate it. If people want to learn more about you, or maybe they're a retailer that's listening to this and they want to have a presence or expand in Cleveland, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So email is probably the best. I don't like my LinkedIn messages. It's all spam, people selling me stuff. But email Kevin.Moss@CBRE.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, just Kevin Moss, and just look up CBRE Cleveland. Active on X, I think Kevin Moss 216. And then Instagram as well, Kevin Moss, I think CRE. But yeah, just email is probably best. That's the way I best organize my day, and I love to connect.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to include those in the show notes. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead in the description. You'll be able to access that, and the same goes for all the other platforms we distribute this on. So, well, Kevin, really appreciate your time. I'm glad we were able to connect, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch. And the next time I'm in Cleveland, I definitely plan to reach out, and hopefully we can get together and grab some coffee.
Yeah, I'd love to show you around.
Yeah, we'd love to. I really would. It'd be a fun experience. But for those of you guys who are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to broader audience, and we greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you guys like this channel, please like and subscribe. And also, if you're listening to this in a podcast format, please leave a 5-star review. The more people that leave a 5-star review, the more reach we get. And the more reach we get, the more people can gain insights from the conversations and learn more about the many facets of commercial real estate. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.